Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on what part of the state everyone's in. Well, we're making it happen despite of the record historic blizzard storms that we are experiencing across the state. Hope everybody's staying safe and warm. Well, today our webinar is thanks to our partners who is able to help us host this webinar. And in a minute, I will be introducing all the participants. But beforehand, I would like to let everyone know that this webinar, we're doing a 10-week series of webinars. So at the end of our series, we will issue a single CEA. We will be tracking everyone who's been attending our webinars. So I'm going to give this off to Mr. Jim Adams with Performance Services, who is able to help us make this webinar happen. Take it off, Mr. Adams. I believe you're on mute.
It doesn't say so.
Okay, there we go. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thanks. I'm Jim Adams. I'm the general manager with Performance Services here in Round Rock, Texas. We're a 22-year-old design build construction company. We're real pleased of our 3-year association with MASBA and the opportunities it's afforded us. Again, we're a design build construction company. We're focused on energy performance contracting services. We help K through 12 schools modernize their old school buildings. Typical improvements that we put in are heating and air conditioning, new lighting, plumbing fixtures. We modernize irrigation systems. We put in solar. We can also help with the building envelope, such as roofing or windows and doors. We help schools make these improvements by using savings from having brand new systems and equipment to pay for the improvements. Right now, we're especially involved with a lot of districts that have stimulus funds associated with improving the ventilation for preventing the spread of COVID. We do this work under Education Code 44.901, which gives us the ability to provide financing. So it can be a terrific way for schools to make much needed improvements if they don't think they can get a bond referendum passed. So more information can be learned about Performance Services on our website, performanceservices.com, or would love to talk to you. My phone number is 812-480-6196. Got 6 engineers in the state, 25 construction professionals. We know everybody's got infrastructure needs, and we'd love to try to see if we can't help. Again, we're pleased to be able to help with this webinar sponsorship.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Adams, for all your support. MASBA really appreciates everything that you've done and all the partnership that you've helped us throughout the years. So once again, thank you. And now I'm going to introduce our moderator. And the topic for our discussion is exacerbated inequities. So for our moderator, we have Dean Julian Vasquez Haley, and we can go ahead and take this off. I would also like to encourage all our attendees, if they have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'd be happy to address those questions. Thank you so much. Dr. Julian?
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Julian Vasquez Heilig. I'm the Dean of the College of Education at the University of Kentucky, but I also have some Texas roots. I worked in Houston ISD for 3 years back in the 1990s and early 2000s, and I was a professor at UT Austin from 2006 to 2014, and right now I have tour of duty here in Kentucky. I'm so honored to lead the 3,000 students, faculty, and staff here. I would like to introduce you to a couple of folks, amazing folks, just women that are are powerful in the work that they do. So I want to introduce you first. I'll go through each of them, and then I'll start with some questions. First, we have Carol Burris, who is the Executive Director of the Network for Public Education. The Network for Public Education is the largest nonprofit that advocates for public education. Several 100,000 members of this organization. I was a founding board member of the Network for Public Education back in 2012. And of course, many of you probably already know the Honorable Georgina Bettis, Texas State board member from way out there in El Paso way. I think you guys just barely made it into Texas out there in El Paso. So, so glad that you all are joining us. And I say that with the fondest, as a fond statement. I've been to El Paso probably 15 times in my life. And then we have Dora Sauceda, who is, many of you probably don't know this, but I chaired Dora Sauceda's dissertation many years ago, and she is one of the students that I am most proud of. She is an assistant superintendent in Brownsville ISD. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
That's correct. Brownsville ISD. So for all of you school board members that are out there looking for a Latina to lead your district, she has been an assistant sup for 6 years and she's ready to make that move. However, I would really like to see her as superintendent here in Fayette County Public Schools in Lexington. So keep an eye out for Dora. She's ready. She's ready.
Thank you.
So it's been 11 months since public schools in Texas and across the nation were turned upside down by this once in a century pandemic. But we want to start on a positive note. And I want to ask some questions to the panel. We can popcorn this. So what do you see having been the impacts on inequality from this pandemic for public education? And I should also say that we picked this panel very purposely. So you have someone from the local level in Dora, you have someone from the state level in Georgina Bettis, and you have someone who's doing national level work in Carol Burris. So that gives us the opportunity to take a peek at this at each of those levels. And so there, one is, could you talk a little bit about the inequities? And we want to try to keep our answers to 2 to 3 minutes. And then could you tell us, let's do a positive thing too. What have you been especially proud of that our public schools have done in the midst of these unparalleled circumstances? So what have you seen? What are the challenges to inequities? And what have you been especially proud of? Just open question.
Okay, I guess I can go first.
Oh, I'm sorry, just real quick, Dr. Julian. We have also school board member Ann Sung from Houston ISD, and she's on the phone. She's not able to access the video.
Okay, Ann, welcome. As you know, I worked in USD for a couple of years, so when I was asked about this panel, Ann came immediately to mind. I think you in Texas are all very aware of the things that are happening in Houston as one of the nation's largest, I think 6th largest school district. As Houston goes, so goes many other districts in the state. So Ann, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, glad to be here.
So glad you're here. Okay, so the question that we have on the table is, how have the inequities been exacerbated? And tell us something that you're especially proud of that our public schools have done in the face of COVID. We're just going to popcorn this, so feel free to jump in.
Okay, well, I'll get started. In Brownsville, Texas, I don't know if most of you all know where that is, but it's the southernmost tip of Texas, and we are a border town. So one of the things that back in March, when this whole situation started, our public school district, what we saw was the lack of connectivity amongst the city. We have very weak Wi-Fi services, internet services. We also have a lot of our students who, mostly live in Mexico, and so they come and go, and I'm sure in El Paso they have the same situation. So what we saw at first was just how difficult it was to ensure that all our students kept that instruction going with no interruptions. And it was quite difficult, to say the least, to get that connectivity going and then ensuring that the students had Wi-Fi. We drove around our schools and we would see our kids parking in front of the schools, trying to get that Wi-Fi service in order for them to continue the education. So those were the things that we saw were quite difficult. Also, the affordability of the Wi-Fi services for many of our parents, they can't afford it. So it was very difficult for them as well to keep that going. So our district, one of the positive things that I saw is that our district was very quick to ensure that all our expenditures went towards buying the devices and hotspots and ensuring that our students were able to get that connectivity going. We had to do some paper packets. As you all very well know, that was TA allowed us to do that. So, you know, there is some positive out of this, and the positives are that our district was willing, and our teachers, mostly our teachers, which are the most important people in our staff, were just shifted so quickly to this online and remote learning. So we saw a lot of positives in terms of the trainings, and then the students being able to just continue the education and continue with their schoolwork. And so as we rolled out this year, we've seen that we were more prepared, and we keep moving along, and we make changes as we need to. But in Brownsville, there is that difficulty, again, going back to ensuring that all our students have that fair and equal access to education.
Yes, thank you so much. You know, before the pandemic, having high-speed internet, having devices for each child in your home, that was a luxury. And not everybody could afford that. And so that's one of those, as you talked about, inequities that was accentuated. And we know the Valley has been hit harder than many other places with the pandemic too. So thank you so much, Dora. I want to encourage you, if you're a tweeter, to tweet at MASBATX and hashtag MASBWebinar from the things that folks are saying, because, you know, we want other folks, maybe they couldn't be here, maybe they have another meeting, but tweet at us thoughts and comments from the panel today, if you're able. Who else would like to weigh in?
This is Ann Sung. I'll jump. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ann.
Thanks, Carol. So what we experience out here in my district is pretty similar to what Dora is talking about. Where I live is we're surrounded by mountains, and so there is no broadband for us to access. My entire district runs from El Paso to Laredo, so it's about 900 miles of Texas-Mexico border. And every town is a border town, right? And so we have a lot of students who are US citizens, but their parents are not. So they live on the Mexico side, but they attend school as US citizens on the US side. However, due to a lack of investment in broadband infrastructure, a lot of us are still doing our schoolwork on paper pencil packets, which means there has been no new learning for about 11 months. There's simply just a review of what was learned in their previous school year. And so what that means, particularly for our demographic, is that, you know, in 5 to 10 years, when these young people become the tax base and the workforce of the community, it has the potential to be quite catastrophic from an economic perspective. And once again, it falls on the shoulders of brown people, of disenfranchised people, of low wealth community members to fix these problems that for all intents and purposes have no means to fix them. But the exacerbation of the pandemic, particularly from the perspective of young students, the extra work that's required of teachers, and what this means to the community in about a decade is something that we're all quite concerned about along the border.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's one of the things we have to be thinking about, which is what is the cumulative effect of this pandemic, and will it affect all families the same? That's exacerbation of inequality that already existed. Now, I want to encourage you if you would like to ask the panel a question, you can tweet those questions at hashtag MASB webinar. We might have a chance right here at the end to get to your questions. I'll be checking my Twitter. I'll be looking down at my phone. So if you want to tweet a question at us, MASB webinar, I will be checking that hashtag for questions. Carol, are you there?
Yes, I am. Looking at it from a national perspective, as well as a personal perspective, and I'm going to start with the personal. I'm the executive director of the Network for Public Education, but for 25 years, I was a teacher and also a high school principal. And what I'm observing nationally now from this position breaks my heart. It just breaks my heart. A good society puts children first. And children have not been put first during this pandemic. I mean, we need to get kids back to school, and that means we need the resources to get them back to school and get them back to school safely, get our teachers vaccinated. Even in places where kids are back to school, for example, in New York City, where I am, we see huge disparities between more affluent children who are able to return and children who live in households of poverty whose parents are just too worried to have them return because the terrible price that people of color have paid during this pandemic in terms of health. And then a huge worry that I have, and again, we see this pattern in cities, is kids that we've lost track of. And I was reading just yesterday that every day there are 300,000 kids in Chicago who never log on, right? So not only are we not able to give kids the kinds of supports that they need, that they can really only get in person, but in terms of connectivity, we're losing connection with lots of kids. I worry about the older kids who, frankly, we may never get back. We may never get them back. Kids who are going to return to school and then say, you know what, I'm so far behind now, I don't want to bother anymore. I'm worried about draconian policies that are going to retain kids. And we know from research what happens is that they become the future dropouts. You know, poverty has taken an extraordinary toll on these children. I mean, one can imagine, even if there are good resources in the home in terms of a laptop or an iPad, that if it's a single parent home, or if both parents are out working in an essential job all day, maybe working in a supermarket, kids are kids. You know, if they're left to their own devices, a lot of them aren't going to log on. It doesn't matter whether they're from a wealthy home or not so wealthy a home. Children are children, and unless you have an adult that's in that house sitting on top of them and saying, hey, you got to log on now, school's starting, they're not going to. I think about kids who are high schoolers who are now taking care of little brothers and sisters, and so they can't log on themselves. I so agree with Georgina. We are going to pay the price for this for years and years and years. And I think it's a national tragedy. And next to the people who have lost their lives to this pandemic, this is certainly the worst consequence of COVID-19.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carol. It's very sobering. I want to say that here in Fayette County, where I live in Lexington, the University of Kentucky partnered with the local school district. And I'm so pleased to tell you that all the educators that wanted to be vaccinated in our community have been vaccinated, that we are aware of. And they are on their second shots already, and school is opening this week with vaccinated educators. That's what leadership looks like, right? That's what community partnerships look like. Now, not every state in Kentucky is finished with their vaccinations, but for educators, but many counties are. And so I think that's something we're really proud of here. In fact, we are on 1C. For those of you that know the different levels of vaccines, we are beginning 1C, which means the broader frontline workers are now starting to be vaccinated in our state. They're working gangbusters here to do that. Now I want to turn to Ann. I worked in Houston ISD. I worked in the accountability and research department back during the Rod Page era, and we knew that ninth grade was a tough year for kids. That is where you lose a lot of those kids. And we knew the grade retention was really high for African American and Latino kids, especially in the high stakes testing area that I worked there. So can you talk a little bit about, and let me just say this first, Houston ISD is doing much better 20 years later than they were when I was there in the 1990s. So I want to give kudos. I know that Houston often is criticized and critiqued by legislators in your state, but I want to acknowledge that Houston has made quite dramatic improvements from where they were even when I was there, in the early 2000s. Ann, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much. So I love the name of this panel. I think it's spot on, right? Anytime we have a natural disaster, and we have hurricanes come through more frequently than we'd like in Houston, we see existing inequalities exacerbated in Houston. So we're a district that's 75 to 80% free or reduced lunch. We're a majority Latino district, and with significant numbers of African American students as well. And what we've seen in this pandemic, no surprise, is that existing inequalities have been exacerbated. So, food insecurity is worse, right? So in many of we have side by side in Houston, very wealthy neighborhoods and then very low income neighborhoods with many immigrants. And we'll see, in our lower income neighborhoods, we have families that are very food insecure right now. We see families who do not have devices to support remote learning, even while the rates of COVID are much higher in neighborhoods where families have to work in person. So as a district, we've put into place supports over the years to make sure that we can provide wraparound supports to families. We really built up our wraparound services after Hurricane Harvey, and those specialists are continuing to help families. We've distributed 7 million meals to students, also meals to families, masks, blankets, because for so many communities, the school is the safest place, right? It's the most trusted institution in the community. So when there's a need, and we say, hey, come and pick up masks, come and get tested at this location, come and pick up food. Families trust that and they will come. So we've distributed food, we've distributed 144,000 devices, iPads, laptops, mobile hotspots as well, so 40,000, because so many of our families live in apartments and they move, right, even in the course of a single school year. And so it's not about broadband that's hardwired into a home. It's about giving a family a mobile hotspot so that all the kids in the family can access the internet, can access school as well. As we are beginning to vaccinate in the state of Texas, teachers have not generally been prioritized, but we have partnered with local pharmacies to make sure that teachers over the age of 65 who meet those 1A, 1B criteria can get vaccinated. And as soon as the state says that we can vaccinate more people, more teachers, and even more community members, we stand ready to help with that as well. So I think that our public schools in Houston are like our counterparts in the Valley and in El Paso, across the state of Texas, working really hard to support families, not just for the education, but for basic needs right now. Because if we don't take care of basic needs, if we don't help our kids get fed and get their healthcare taken care of, then it's impossible for them to learn right now.
So thank you, Ann. I think you have sort of talked about what really weighing on your heart. I want to thank you for doing that, and I want to thank Houston for addressing those basic needs with blankets and food. There's so many food insecure, so many homeless youth. So thank you for having that as a priority for the children in your community. You did start to talk about actions. I'm sure there's some school board members on here that are thinking, okay, we've talked about those inequities. We're seeing that happen also in our community, whether it's rural, suburban, or urban. You talked about some of those actions. Could you all talk to us, the audience here? What are some of the other actions that you've seen either being taken in your community or in other places that may be pecuniary, they may be non-pecuniary? So there may be policy changes, there may be investments, monetary, non-monetary. Could you talk a little bit about some of those best practices that you've seen or you're implementing for this pandemic to address these inequities?
If I could speak to a couple of things that I'm familiar with in New York that I think have been very helpful. One is that educators were prioritized for the vaccine. We may be one of the few places where that's happened. The first group was healthcare workers. Right behind that was teachers. And I think because of that, you see a lot more of our schools open. If you look in the suburban areas, nearly all of them are open. They have more resources for the space. But New York City has done, I think, a pretty remarkable job. Part of it was because the mayor was persistent in his insistence that schools open, and part of it was because there was, and this is going to sound funny, a union that pushed back and made sure it was done safely. So a lot of good things came from that process. And they also, I think, did a pretty good job throughout the worst days of the pandemic. I mean, we were hit hard last spring. They made sure that the schools were open to provide food. They made sure that kids were getting hotspots, that they were getting devices. I mean, it took them a while, but they did it. And I think that there's been moving forward. That's been good. There's been some really good attempts to balance that hybrid program with the fully remote program, make sure that the curriculum is similar in both programs. The kids with special needs, they were brought back right away. So all of the special education schools were opened up, and they were opened up, immediately, or as soon as schools were ready to open, which was toward the end of September. And then even when we had the surge in the winter, New York closed down, but just for a few days, and then brought the elementary kids back. And I mean, I thought that was such a smart decision, because if you think about our little ones, K to 5, they are really the least able to learn online and the most in need of supervision during the day. For parents that have to go out to work, you probably leave your teenager at home, though, with some worries. But you can't leave your elementary kids home alone. So I think New York did some good in that regard. And hopefully by September, we'll be able to get everybody back full time every day. Oh, in instances where they could accommodate it because they had enough space, there are some elementary schools now that are open 5 days a week.
One of the problems that we have out here in Texas, and not just in my district, but I think statewide, is that we see how very important our educators are. And let's not pretend that schools are in many communities the backbone of the economy. Parents have to work, so their children have to be somewhere safe, right? Whether they're K-5 or teenagers or etc. I think I'm more inclined to leave my 5th grader home alone than I would be to leave my teenager home alone. But that's just my family, right? But what we're seeing is that our teachers are not prioritized, right? Not in Texas. Our schools are being forced to open up and bring in all of the kids, regardless of how dangerous the situation is. The state has said they're not going to compensate or assist should they become ill, etc. So we're at some sort of a catalyst here where we see how very dependent our local and statewide economies are on teachers. And at the same time, the state is telling teachers, good luck with that situation, right? So we see teachers and custodians and cafeteria personnel, et cetera, going above and beyond to get the work to students, to park buses in areas so that the hot spots will work, because for the most part, we struggle just because of geography, to get the hot spots to work, and to deliver meals, and to make sure that our families are as safe as possible, while out of the same mouth, with the same breath, the state is saying, you're still not a priority for vaccination. You're still not a priority for healthcare. You're still not a priority to us, other than to sacrifice yourselves for the good of the economy. And I think that this legislative session, and not only at the state level, but at the national level, we need to see some real changes in supports to our teachers and our school staff, because we cannot keep pushing and pushing and pushing and demanding so much from them, and then telling them that they need to wear this burnout and self-sacrifice like some sort of badge of honor. They're human beings, and they deserve to be treated far better than what our state and nation treats them.
And
Wow.
I agree with Georgina wholeheartedly. I do. And if I can just jump in for a few minutes and say, one of the things I was asked by a senator, because they want to talk about, what can we do to help teachers in education, was prioritize the teachers, vaccinate the teachers. We are 24 states in the United States have made them a priority. We are not one of them. Yet we are one out of 4 states that is saying, keep the schools open. Keep them open and available for our students, which we want to do. I wholeheartedly want our kids to be in school, but we cannot have them in school with teachers that are not vaccinated. They need that vaccine in order for them to feel safe, to be in the classroom with our children, because here in South Texas, and I'm sure in El Paso you see this as well, we have those multiple families living in one home. You have that poverty level that exists here. You're going to have the grandparents in the home that are over the age of 65 and living with the parents who are working, and then the teenagers that are taking care of the little ones. So that's why you see those Brownsville being a hotspot, because of that, because of these multiple families living together and the poverty level being so high. So I completely agree with everything that Georgina's saying. I wish we would do more. I'm proud of what New York did, Carol. I think that's awesome, and I'm hoping that that we do start prioritizing our teachers.
Hey, what about Kentucky, Dora? You should be proud of us too. Come on now.
Yes, I am. And like you said, I know, I'm sorry, I completely forgot, but I got really into what Georgina was saying, because
Yeah.
I so agree with her. I mean, I'm there, right there with you, because we really need our teachers vaccinated. And thank you in Kentucky for vaccinating the teachers. I think that's amazing, amazing work.
So, yeah, Georgina always takes me where I want to go. We're like Wonder Twins. There's an old cartoon like Wonder Twins Unite, and then they would put their rings. I don't know if you guys are from that generation, but okay. So there was this, yeah. So that's where I really was thinking, there are people out there that, the irony is thick in regards to vaccination of teachers, COVID, etc. And that spans stakeholders. It's not just policymakers. There are parents, there are colleagues, there are even scientists out there that have perspectives on this that contrast. So how do school board members, how do they speak to those stakeholders about the importance of A, responding to these inequities, and B, addressing COVID, a pandemic, appropriately? Do you have any advice for, maybe Ann does, I know she didn't get to speak this round yet, but how do you talk to those folks that maybe have taken COVID a little less seriously than maybe they should have? Is Ann still there?
Hi, I
Maybe
am here. I'm sorry, I was handling my kid is home with the snow day. So Julian, the question I heard you ask previously was about what's working, and we had a robust conversation And I agree wholeheartedly with Georgina and with Trustee Salceda about the importance of vaccinating our teachers. Did you add something to the question right at the end?
Yes, I'm sorry. And that's one of the things I love when I call in is I get to hear her child, and when I go down to Houston and hang out with her, get to spend time with her and her kid. So the question is about how do we make have convicting conversations, not just with legislators, but with other policymakers and stakeholders that we want them to take the COVID pandemic more seriously and take the inequities related to the pandemic more seriously. How do we broach those conversations?
I think in the Houston area, we've had conversations bringing together diverse stakeholders. So Houston ISD has regular conversations with our health authority. We also speak with our legislators, our union, and I think the consensus seems to be, it's important for our schools to be able to serve our kids, especially our students with disabilities, but that we also need to work to make schools safer. And I very much wish, like others have said, that we could have vaccination for our teachers and other school-based employees as well, our bus drivers, our custodians, et cetera, as other states have done. We have had many legislators from Houston, petition the state saying, please let's make it a priority in Texas to vaccinate our school-based staff. So I think that message is getting through to legislators. They're petitioning the state, they're petitioning Governor Abbott to do that. And it's just a matter of, sitting down and letting our legislators know, what is it like in our schools? What are the concerns that our teachers who are working so hard to teach students that are both in person and at home? And what are the concerns of families as well, who are still hesitating? In some neighborhoods, even elementary schools, only 20 or 30% of students are back. And that's because families don't have the confidence yet to send kids back in person. I think having those conversations where you paint the picture.
And can I ask a question about
makers? Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the elementary schools, is there differences between communities that have higher attendance in person than others? Is there anything you've noticed?
Absolutely. There's a huge difference. You have our neighborhoods with more minority students, more immigrants, more African-American students. Often our families are choosing, despite the difficulty, to keep kids at home because the rate of community spread for COVID is so high in many of our immigrant and low-income communities in Houston. On the other hand, we have communities where the vast majority of elementary school students are back in school. And those tend to be our whiter, more affluent neighborhoods where families in general are able to work from home, right? There's less exposure to COVID, the COVID rate is lower. So there is a difference in the choices that families that are making that are they're extremely rational based upon, the rates of risk to COVID and also access to healthcare.
Fascinating. Houston is such a large district and has so many different types of schools. I see Anna coming in. Did you have something?
Yes, I am also a school board member in the Central Texas area. I'm a school board member for Manor ISD, and I also serve as the president-elect of MASBA. I wanted to add to your question, or what would, as a school board member, advise or recommend other school board members. And my thoughts are, and this is what I do, I reach out to my superintendent. What are your struggles? What are we facing? We already know that my district specifically is like 80% economically disadvantaged. We have, I believe, like 90% free and reduced lunches. We're about 70% Latino, 20%, Black. So we are facing, my district has been facing a lot of struggles and a lot of issues. I know that even on some kind of decision-making policy practices, we've increase the number of spending that the superintendent would require from, say, 25,000, we increased it to 50,000 because we knew the need was there. We bought more laptops. We had to get, Wi-Fi, buses. It was very, very hard. But I would recommend is, we know what our district is facing, but I would also have candid conversations with our superintendents, because they know a lot, items that we might be missing, and from there take it to your legislators, your policymakers, your decision makers. I know all of my state reps in the whole area, and some of the state board of educators, and I've been at the Capitol quite often every legislative session, but this is going to be a lot more different. This is, we have to stick together. And I also offer that to all of our attendees, all our school board members, that if there's anything that we, even MOSBA as the organization, can do to leverage those voices together, I offer that, and that's what we're here for. So I think it's very important to communicate with one another now, more with, I guess, even if it's social media, whatever that may look like. But I just wanted to share that. That was just at the top of my head, because I do reach out to my superintendent. I know what we have in our district, but what other issues are we bumping into? What do you need? What would be ideal for me as an advocate to do for my district? So
Thank you for jumping in. We appreciate that. We were talking about advocating with superintendents, advocating with your communities. I know we're a little bit off script in that last question, so I'm going to come back here now. So the pandemic is not, in its current form, is not going to last forever. We know, for example, that H1N1, also known as a swine flu, was the cause of the 1918 flu and has been with us for 100 years. So, the scientists are saying that COVID-19 will probably be with us for quite some time, if not forever, with its different variants, et cetera. We understand it, but the world won't be as it is now. And so we're going to emerge from this. And so what is it that we need to be, and thinking forward, and at the College of Education at the University of Kentucky, we're doing the same thing. We're thinking about, what does our college look like post-COVID? What do we need to do strategically after COVID? And what do you need to advocate for from state leaders and federal leaders to prepare us post-COVID, to address the inequalities, as Georgina and other folks have talked about, will be cumulative and probably lasting. So what should we be advocating for post-COVID times? Excuse me.
Well, number one, I think that what we have seen the last 2 years, particularly because the state of Texas has chosen to waive accountability for our high stakes standardized testing, is that we need to get back to a testing model that is more diagnostic. And particularly when we're speaking of this in terms of how to recover from so much time lost in the classroom and how to make up for this amount of loss. The draconian consequences attached to high stakes standardized tests are not going to help us catch up, so to speak, right? And then on top of that, it's a bit asinine to test children at the end of the year, so that when there's not a whole bunch of time left to help them catch up or relearn, and teachers to reteach, etc. And so if the state of Texas wants an accountability system, then let's look at other states that do this much better. Number two, the amount of money that we invest in our high stakes standardized testing is beyond ridiculous. And so not only because we have a budget shortfall, but there are far better ways to invest this amount of money that can help us not only recover our students and protect our teachers, but also to help protect our schools during the time that we're going to continue living with COVID. And lastly, I would say that when we're looking at our budget, particularly our public education budget, there's a great deal of money that is spent on ridiculous pet projects and other facets of where money is placed for more of a private interest that does not serve the greater good. It does not serve 80, 90% of students. So if we really want to focus on the economy, let's pay better attention to number one, where we're putting our money, because ultimately that's really what we care about. And number two, better ways to serve our students when it comes to the learning loss and catch up that we need, so that our 10 years from now, the results of this pandemic are not as severe as what they're currently being predicted.
No, absolutely. And just a quick point on this, when I was in Texas back in 2012, we created a community-based accountability, which is now being implemented in some places in Texas, but has been in place in California for quite some time, and lowered suspension rates, improved student success, increased graduation rates. You can look at that study by the Learning Policy Institute. So there are alternative ways of doing accountability than the way that Texas has been doing it since the mid-1990s, which is a very top-down, structured with high-stakes tests. The local control accountability plans, just Google that. There are alternative ways to do accountability post-COVID. Other thoughts about post-COVID world investment supports? Carol, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think about it a lot. I certainly agree with Georgina. There is no reason to do high stakes testing at this time. It just absolutely makes no sense. We have neither the time nor the treasure to do it. The time, learning time, and the treasure, which is our tax dollars, need to be directed towards students, right? I think when kids come back in a more full way, we just have to accept where they are, right? I mean, we're going to accelerate their instruction. We're going to move them ahead. But if we try to set some unreasonable goal, like, oh my goodness, they have to be exactly where they would have been if it hadn't been COVID, it's a fool's gambit. Universities are going to have to be more tolerant. They're going to have to provide more supports for kids. We're going to have to think about how we can provide more supports for kids outside of the school day, but at the same time, not go back to any kinds of policies that punish them, retention being one of them. If you want to close the achievement gap, what you do is you focus on the opportunity gap. And that's where our focus should be. Certainly more resources should go toward districts with higher levels of high need students. I mean, it doesn't take a crystal ball or a high stakes test to know that what we commonly call the achievement gap is widened. So we know where the problems are going to be. We know where the need is going to be. Let's just put our money there. And then I think we also have to address some of the wider problems that cause this disparity to begin with, and that's to look at economic policy in this country. I applaud the efforts to increase the minimum wage, opportunities for jobs, better childcare, all of those pieces, if we are ultimately going to close the gaps in both opportunity and learning for children, have to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that after the 2008 recession, that Texas cut $6 billion, $7 billion, quite a bit of money, and it took them a decade, arguably, to put that money back. And we know Texas has found themselves in school finance court, 5 times? Quite a few. So, Assistant Superintendent Doris Sauceda, what do you think your district is going to need post-COVID to address these inequities that we've been talking about?
I think most importantly is the redirection of funding over to per pupil expenditure. I think that needs to go much, much higher than what we're at right now. I think it's extremely low. We're going to need more money in order for us to be able to provide those services. One of the things, we see, of course, we always talk about closing the achievement gap. And now with the COVID slide, I mean, that gap is just getting bigger and bigger. So we have to offer some more after school programs, maybe do some, I'm thinking moving forward, we're going to be very creative with our schedules, with the way the calendar looks like for the year, to be more intersessional, to have more support programs in the summer, and really bring in those students that are lacking the literacy, because that's the area, if the student can't read, they can't do anything else. And so moving forward, I know that we need to redirect our funding over to more supplementary services and that social emotional learning. I know that in our district, we're going to be really looking at that and starting implementing more the SEO programs this next year. But you know, that's going to be an area that's going to be critical. And back when I was in at UT and getting my dissertation, I did my dissertation on school finance during the time that we had that shortfall. And one of the things I saw is all these supplementary services like counseling, nursing, extra assistance for the students was all cut during that time. And I foresee that that's going to happen this coming time that we get our funding. So I really hope that our legislators, I really hope that our representatives are really thinking about education, prioritizing education and redirecting some of that money we spend on testing to assist our students with these supplementary services moving forward.
Thank you, Dora. And I'm gonna just say again, a quick one, because I got to do close. A quick one, Georgina.
So if we look, Ms. Salceda, I will say this, that when we look at how much additional cost to the state that we have, and this is an analysis from the LBB, when we look at how much additional cost to the state, which is ultimately taxpayer dollars, you'll see that it's damn close to the budget shortfall. And the additional cost is to privately managed and out-of-state managed charter schools. And so when we're talking about dropout recovery, when we're talking about wraparound services, when we're talking about an extended calendar, we're talking about meals, etc., to protect our children and our communities, the money is there. It's just being spent on the, you know, for the wrong reasons in the wrong places. And so it's not that we don't have the money, it's that the right people aren't sitting at the table to get the money to where it needs to be.
That's a good point. You know, I've done a lot of research on school choice. And what Texas is essentially doing is funding two separate systems of education. Funding two systems of education is more expensive than funding one. That's the bottom line. That's where the rubber meets the road, especially when you're doing it inefficiently. I got to get to a wrap here, but I do want to say, and I'm going to ask one final question. I do want to say this conversation doesn't have to stop here. You folks are going to be watching this in perpetuity. And, you know, MASBA has a tweet out about this event. Just go to their tweet and you can reply with questions because all of us are on that Twitter. So you can follow us on Twitter. You can shoot questions out at us, at Carol at MPE, and at Dora down in Brownsville, and Georgina out in El Paso, and Ann out in Houston. So feel free to go to the MASBA Twitter feed, tweet questions out at us, and we can address those once you watch this video. So that's what's great about social media. Once you watch this, you can still send us questions. So don't forget, #MASBA webinar. Also, okay, so we got to close here. We have about 4 minutes. That each of you have 1 minute. If I had 4 PhDs here, I'd be a little worried. But so here's the last question. A call to action for people listening to this conversation. A call to action very quickly because we've got to wrap. Let's just do a go around. Carol, what's your call to action to remedy these inequities relative to COVID?
My call to action is to put children first and to insist that our politicians have policies that put children
I'm getting a little background. Could you go on mute, please?
To ensure that that adults wear masks, to ensure that teachers are prioritized in terms of vaccination. And when funding comes from Washington, and it will, to ensure that it supplements and not supplants state funding. And I'll tell you, it's going to be a problem in New York because the governor Cuomo likes nothing better than to take the money he gets from Washington and use it to fill his budget hole instead of giving that extra funding to schools. And at every state, in every state in the nation, we need to make sure that that money is not used to plug holes, but to take what the state is already giving and adding that money on top of it.
Excellent point. Dora, quick call to action.
My call to action would be to prioritize our students and make sure that education is a #1 priority for our state and vaccinate the teachers, vaccinate them, vaccinate our staff, because that is the way we're going to be able to get back to normal school and regular, and just giving the assistance to our students and making sure that they're getting all the supplementary services that they need.
Anne, are you there? Quick call to action.
I am. Let's not let our state legislators off the hook. I think that people have done a good job putting fear into Texans to say, well, we don't know where money's going to come from for education this session. But the reality is, if our kids are important and if our future is important to us in the state of Texas, then we need to be putting more money into education, not less. House Bill 3, one session ago, got us from the bottom quintile to the fourth quintile of states in terms of investments in education. And that's not good enough given how much education our kids have lost this year especially. So let's set expectations higher for our legislators. Let's ask for the vaccinations. Let's ask for the supplement, not supplant, because that's popular here in Texas too.
Yeah, and I suspect Tesla and all the other companies that like to move to Texas probably want to see those investments in education. Georgina, we'll leave it with you. Bring us home, sister.
So I will say this: number one, vaccinate our teachers and vaccinate all of our school staff. Number two, don't believe the hype. When they tell you that there is not budgeting, there's no, they're lying to you. We're spending almost the same amount of our budget shortfall to fund charters. Number three, we're using about $1 billion on border security when the federal government is already funding that. If you're looking to find the money, you don't have to look far. It's there. If we really want to make sure that our Latino population does not bear the brunt of the COVID slide and the learning loss and whatever else you want to call this, we need to start investing not only in our children and our students, but this lack of broadband needs to end now. Because this is not just about our children's education. This is online banking. This is telehealth. This is a whole bunch of stuff that these communities don't have, because our state has a serious divestment when it comes to broadband and infrastructure, and we have the money for it. So again, if somebody's telling you there's no money or they can't find the money, don't believe the hype. They're lying to you. We have the money. We're just not allocating it correctly.
Thank you, Georgina. It's been a pleasure having this womanal today, and I'll turn it back to Donna.
Well, thank you, everyone. These distinguished panelists, very rich conversations. Like, you know, we've mentioned many times, it doesn't stop here. So once again, thank you. I would also like to thank Dr. Vasquez Heilig for moderating this very rich discussion. Thank you so much. And once again, thank our sponsor, Mr. Jim Adams, and all our friends at Performance Services for the support of their sponsorship of this webinar, Mr. Adams. Thank you so much.
Well, yes, our pleasure. And again, if you need some engineering help to evaluate the indoor air quality of your classrooms to help with COVID mitigation, please contact us at performanceservices.com. Again, our pleasure and thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, real quick, please join us next week where we'll have MASBA, the immediate past president, Mr. Willie Tenorio of Hayes CISD, that will host a conversation on the learning loss that resulted from this pandemic with perspectives by Dr. Eduardo Cancino of Region 1 Education Service Center, J.R. Gonzalez of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, bilingual ed director Sur El Buga of Marble Falls ISD, bilingual ed teacher Caroline Sweet of Austin ISD, and PK-12 education advocate Karen Vates. Free and open to all. And just remember, trustees, we will be issuing those CECs at the end of our 10-week webinar. Thank you so much once again. And Holly Maria Flynn Villaseca was supposed to be here from Houston ISD. Amiga, stay safe. I know she was out power. Betsy, and you guys stay warm and safe. Thank you so much once again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.